Marijuana and sausages. So in January 1995, the company I work for dispatched me to Holland. They had a factory in Holland that had an issue with a chicken factory that had an issue with their weighing system. It'd been intermittent. I think other engineers had flown out, and anyway, they hadn't discovered the fault. So the MO was I was to drive from home to Zeebrugge, drive to the site in Deutschenum, and basically wait for the problem to occur. Just sit there and see what happens. It's the first time I'd sailed to the continent. I had sailed from the UK to Ireland before. This was an overnight ferry, and the particular class that I was booked into on the boat, if I'm honest, I wouldn't put up with today. So whatever level it was on the boat, there was no ensuite toilet, and there was a shared facilities for the floor. I think a good while later my manager got the very same ferry, and he then had an edict that in future we don't get that class of cabin again. But to be fair, it was okay. I had the cabin to myself, and on a few occasions that hasn't been the case, and not in a good way. So I arrived in Holland, arrived in Europe for the first time, having very little experience driving on the wrong side of the road. Apologies to my European and American friends, it's the wrong side of the road. And I had a couple of near misses, usually involving junctions and roundabouts where you engage automatic mode, and yeah, it can be hard. I'm very lucky though that since then I've spent many years driving in the US and Europe, so now it's second nature. But at the time, it was pretty hard going. So I got to the factory, and it never went wrong. I sat there and I watched it, and there was no problems. The only thing to note was that during one of the breaks, they had quite a few breaks during the day because a lot of the work was done by women, and it was involved in trussing chickens and things like that. Very highly skilled, dexterous, repetitive work. And it always seemed to be women who excelled at it, and it was predominantly women who did it. I remember one particular break time going into the canteen, and there was a couple of young ladies in there having their break. Nothing really major to note apart from the fact that they were both smoking a joint. It's the first time in my life I'd ever seen any drug other than paracetamol, Disprin, whatever. And it was quite interesting anyway. So on the way back from Holland, I got the ferry home, and for whatever reason, I was young. I didn't really mix with people. I was a pretty quiet person. But for whatever reason on this particular trip, I ended up in the bar having a pint or two. And I got talking to a salesman from a company based near Manchester. And he was telling me a story about China. He was telling me how one of his colleagues had gone to China to sell sausages. He actually worked for a sausage company. They made sausages, and there's a lot to be said for sausages. I appreciate it's all in the seasoning, isn't it, really? I mean, the meat as well. We know what the meat is, so we won't go down that particular avenue. But he was telling me that, so one of his colleagues had gone to China. They wanted to export sausages to China. I'm not too certain about the financial side of things. For me, I find it hard to believe that could be a thing. But maybe certain upper class people in China might want sausages from Manchester. Who knows? But he was telling me the story that his colleague had got an internal flight in China. He didn't elaborate on which internal flight, which airline, where it was going, but it crashed. There was 180 people on board. There was less than 10 survivors, and his colleague was one of them. And he said to me, Jason, at some point I must have told him my name, Jason, if you ever end up going to China, do not get an internal flight. Get the train, do anything. Do not get a flight. I said, listen, I'm never going to be going to China. 3 months later, I'm in Beijing International Airport, getting an internal flight